I was sitting in a high-end coffee shop last Tuesday, watching a couple on what appeared to be a first date. The woman was impeccably styled, her phone resting face up on the table. Every few minutes, the screen would ignite with a literal cascade of notifications. Tinder matches, Instagram likes, DMs from accounts with names that sounded like luxury brands. She had this aura of practiced nonchalance, a digital mirage of status that made it seem as though the man sitting across from her was just one pixel in an infinite glowing scroll of options. The guy, meanwhile, was clearly performing. He was dressed in a suit that felt slightly too aggressive for mid-afternoon, talking in the clipped, authoritative cadence of a self-help podcast. He kept dropping keywords like leverage, optimization, and high value, as if he were trying to manifest a persona he'd downloaded that morning. He was fighting a losing battle against a ghost, the thousands of idealized alpha avatars she held in the palm of her hand. But then the atmosphere shifted. He made a comment about traditional roles, something he clearly pulled from a red pill script to test the waters. Her expression didn't just sour, it turned to stone. She didn't argue or counterpoint. She simply picked up her phone, her thumb moving with the mechanical speed of a high-frequency trader, and within seconds, she had mentally checked out of the room. He, sensing the rejection, didn't soften. He became more rigid, his eyes flashing with a mix of resentment and sexual resource deflation. Watching them, I realized I wasn't witnessing a simple personality clash. I was watching two algorithmic prisoners performing a ritual that had been corrupted at the source. They weren't reacting to each other. They were reacting to the distorted reflections the system had fed them for years. By 2026, we've entered what many are calling the year of trust bankruptcy. It is a world where the algorithms don't just reflect our preferences. They've triggered a species-level cognitive isolation. We're living through a human version of the behavioral sink, where the very technology meant to bring us together has instead enacted a silent, dopamine-fueled pruning of our ability to connect. The question is, in a landscape where every interaction is a high-risk asymmetric contract, is there any way back to reality, or are we simply watching the digital execution of the modern social fabric?
Wow, that is a powerful opening. And it's so accurate, it's almost painful to hear, because I think we've all seen some version of that scene play out.
It felt like watching a play where the actors had been given two completely different scripts.
Exactly. And to understand what happened in that coffee shop, to understand that complete disconnect, we have to pull the lens way back. We need to look at these massive systemic forces at play.
You're talking about the convergence of what our basic evolutionary psychology and this new hyper-optimized technology.
Precisely. And this deep dive really is about trying to get to the bottom of that. We're going to explore this really chilling scientific concept called the behavioral sink and see how its dynamics have led us to this year of trust bankruptcy, and how we all, in a way, became algorithmic prisoners.
So to really get this, to grasp the scale of the breakdown, we can't start with dating apps. We have to go back further.
Much further. We have to start with the scientific metaphor that honestly underpins this entire analysis. It all starts with some mice in a cage.
The famous behavioral sink experiments.
That's right. To really understand the social fracture we're seeing today, we have to go back to the 1960s and the work of an American ethologist named John B. Calhoun. His experiments were, well, they were influential, to say the least, and ultimately, they were terrifying.
And his most famous setup, the one everyone points to, is Universe 25. So break that down for us. What exactly was this rodent utopia he created?
Well, his goal was to remove all the normal pressures of life, all the external threats. So he built these enclosures, first for rats, later for mice, that were, for all intents and purposes, perfect.
Perfect in what sense?
Materially perfect. Unlimited food. Unlimited water, climate controlled, no predators, no disease. The enclosure itself was designed to support, I think, up to 5,000 mice, theoretically.
And he started with just a few healthy pairs.
Just 8 breeding pairs. So you have this perfect material world. The only things missing were, 1, the need to struggle for anything, and 2, the ability to escape the increasing social pressure as the population inevitably grew.
Okay, so he basically eliminated all the drivers of evolution, the things that normally force cooperation or innovation. So what happened? I assume at first things went well?
Oh, at first it was a boom. The population exploded. It doubled, I think, every 55 days or so. Calhoun called it the exploitation phase. The mice were thriving, life was easy. But then, around day 315, something changed.
And the population was what, around 600 at that point?
About 620, yeah. And even though there was still physically room and food for thousands more, the growth rate just plummeted. They had hit a wall, but it wasn't a physical wall, it was a social one.
And this is the paradox. This is the core of it. The resources are infinite, but the behavior just starts to collapse. What were the actual symptoms? What did he see that made him call it a behavioral sink?
It was a total breakdown of, well, everything that makes a society function. Social roles, complex behaviors, they just deteriorated. The most shocking was probably what happened with the mothers.
The parental roles collapsed.
Catastrophically. The females, they became so stressed from the constant unwanted social contact that they lost the ability to build proper nests. They couldn't nurture their young.
And the infant mortality rate was astronomical, wasn't it?
In some of the pens, it hit 96%. They would just abandon their pups to die.
Wow. Just a complete failure of the most basic biological script. What about the males?
The males fractured. The normal social structure, defending territory, courtship rituals, all of that just vanished. Instead, you got chaos.
Yeah.
Violence, deviance. Males started cannibalizing the abandoned pups. The entire colony structure just melted away.
So it wasn't the lack of resources, it was the crushing weight of constant meaningless social interaction. The functional behaviors that used to be rewarded were now, punished by constant intrusion.
That's it, exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting, because out of that chaos, you see the emergence of these specialized but totally non-functional males. Calhoun identified very specific categories.
Right. And these archetypes feel uncomfortably familiar today. Let's walk through them.
So first, in those super dense compartments, you had the ones you'd expect. The fighters. These were the males who just kept trying to be dominant. They'd get into these violent, pointless fights over territory that didn't matter anymore, or mating rights that were functionally non-existent.
So just pure aggressive performance with no actual purpose?
Yeah.
A status game where the prize has vanished.
Exactly. Then you had the second group, which he called the probers. And these guys were bizarre. They were hypersexual, very aggressive, and they would just pursue females constantly with none of the normal courtship rituals.
And they were relentless, right?
Completely. What was so strange is that they became desensitized to failure. They'd get beaten up badly by one of the fighter males, and they would just calmly take it and then go right back to what they were doing. Just pure, unthinking impulse.
And then there's the third group, the one that really gives this whole experiment its chilling modern-day metaphor. The somnambulists.
The beautiful ones. And they represent the end point, really, the total behavioral surrender. These mice withdrew from everything. No fighting, no mating, no social interaction at all.
So what did they do?
They ate, they slept, and they groomed themselves obsessively. And because they never fought, their coats were perfect, unscarred. They were aesthetically pristine, physically healthy. But they were socially dead.
Socially obsolete. They were incapable of performing any function that would continue the species.
Right. They were physically present, but psychologically gone. An evolutionary dead end born from a world with no challenges.
And that withdrawal is what led to what Calhoun called the death squared.
First behavioral death, then biological death. The population just dwindled to zero. They went extinct. Not from hunger, not from thirst, but from a complete loss of purpose. A loss of meaning in a world of material plenty.
That is the central lesson, isn't it? That abundance without structure, without the need for struggle, can lead to a total social collapse. I know Calhoun made some pretty dire predictions for humans based on this, something about the year 2027.
He did, yeah. He was worried that if human population growth continued unchecked, we could face a similar kind of behavioral paralysis. But, we have to address the big question here.
Are we just mice in a cage?
Right. I mean, we haven't seen mass cannibalism in London or Tokyo, and that's where the research had to evolve. Calhoun was focused on physical density, people per square foot.
But later researchers, like Friedman in the 70s, they made a distinction.
A crucial one. They distinguished between physical density, which is just a number, and subjective crowding, which is a psychological state. Humans are good at adapting. You can be on a packed subway car.
And feel the density, but not necessarily feel crowded if you can just put on headphones and tune everyone out.
Exactly. We have these mechanisms for cognitive insulation. Calhoun himself eventually came around to this idea that the real poison wasn't the number of bodies, it was the number of unwanted social interactions, the constant, overwhelming need to engage with or filter out other beings.
And in the 21st century, the driver of that unwanted interaction isn't a physical wall.
It's the screen in your pocket. Our minds have become the enclosure. The density is now informational and social, and it's amplified 1,000,000 times over by technology.
So the structural parallel is there. Abundance leading to paralysis. And that brings us directly to how our ancient psychology is basically being hacked by our modern digital world.
Precisely. This is the core of evolutionary mismatch.
Right. So if it's not physical crowding that's the problem for us, it's this informational social crowding. And that's where the concept of evolutionary mismatch becomes so critical. Our ancient programming is just. It's not built for this new digital environment.
Not at all. I mean, think about the world our brains evolved in. For millennia, we lived in these small, low-mobility hunter-gatherer groups. Your entire mate pool, the number of potential partners you'd meet in your lifetime, might have been a few dozen people, total.
And all of our psychological tools, our instincts, how we choose a partner, how we commit, were fine-tuned for that very small, very stable, slow-moving market.
And today, we're operating in an environment that is the complete opposite. The research we looked at uses this fantastic acronym to describe it. Strangely weird.
Let's break that down, because every letter in there represents a major departure from our ancestral past.
Okay, so it stands for social media, temporary relationships, relocatable, autonomous, nulliparous.
Nulliparous meaning few or zero children.
Right. Then group segmentation, educational setting, lots of options, and young. Each one of these is a profound shift.
Take just relocatable and autonomous.
Yeah.
Ancestrally, you were tied to your kin group. Your choices were probably heavily influenced, if not made, by your family.
Absolutely. And that provided a certain kind of, well, a necessary pressure. It forced long-term investment. Today, you can be completely autonomous, move anywhere, and disconnect from those social structures. That freedom, which we see as a good thing, also removes the interdependence that used to be the bedrock of relationships.
So this strangely weird environment is putting all this bizarre pressure on adaptations that were meant for a totally different world. Let's really drill down into the two biggest mismatches that are driven by technology: social media and lots of options.
Okay, so first, the input. Social media is, at its core, a cue delivery system. But it's one on an insane scale. Ancestrally, you'd assess a potential mate in person, in vivo. You'd use this whole suite of cues, their behavior over time, their reputation, scent, tone of voice.
A rich, multidimensional picture. Social media strips all of that away and replaces it with something that's incredibly intense, but also really flat. Impoverished.
That's the perfect word. The information is so impoverished, yet it's delivered at a rate that is completely overwhelming. It functions as what ethologists call a supernormal stimulus.
Okay, explain that. What's a supernormal stimulus in this context?
It's an exaggerated version of a natural stimulus that triggers a much stronger response. The classic example is a bird that will prefer to sit on a giant, brightly colored fake egg instead of its own smaller, real eggs.
Its brain is just hijacked by the bigger, brighter signal.
Exactly. And in the digital world, our ancient brain mechanisms, which are designed to quickly scan for signs of health or status, are just bombarded. You can swipe through 100 digitally enhanced, perfectly curated, high-status images in 5 minutes. Our brains never evolved to process that volume of input.
Too much, too fast, too perfect. And that curated aspect is key, isn't it? You're not seeing reality. You're seeing a strategic, idealized performance. What does that do to your own self-perception?
Well, that's the dangerous feedback loop. You're constantly exposed to these highlight reels, and you unconsciously start to recalibrate your own sense of worth against this impossible artificial standard.
And that, in turn, affects your own perceived mate value. If I see that I'm getting 100 likes on a photo, I start to think I'm a bigger deal than I might be offline.
Precisely. And higher self-perceived mate value, for both men and women, directly leads to having higher expectations for a partner. You start demanding more desirable traits. This is the mechanism that creates what some call the cognitive illusion of high status. Especially for women who are flooded with attention online, it can create a feeling that they're operating in this infinite market of top-tier options.
An expectation that they can attract a globally optimal partner becomes their baseline. Okay, so that's the input problem. Now let's talk about the second mismatch. The sheer number of options.
The lots of options part of weird. The research on this, on what's called choice overload, is it's definitive. Having more options counterintuitively makes us less happy.
Which seems completely wrong. Why wouldn't more choice be better?
It's about cognitive load. Let's say in your ancestral village, you have 4 potential partners to consider. You can afford to use what's called a weighted average strategy. You look at each person holistically.
Does a complete package?
Exactly. You can weigh the pros and cons. You know, he's not the strongest hunter, but he's incredibly kind and reliable. You can make a nuanced trade-off-based decision.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when you have 64 options in one swipe session? or 1,000 over a month.
You can't do that holistic analysis. It's cognitively impossible. So your brain switches to a much cruder, more ruthless strategy. Elimination by aspects.
The checklist.
The ultimate checklist. You just start cutting people based on single attributes. Too short, swipe left. Wrong job title, swipe left. Likes pineapple on pizza, swipe left. You're forced to rely on the most superficial, easily filtered traits because it's the only way to manage the volume.
And the studies show this makes people miserable with their final choice.
Deeply unsatisfied. There was a study where people who chose from a selection of 24 jams were far less happy with their purchase than people who chose from only 6. It's the psychological weight of knowing that the perfect jam or the perfect partner might have been just one more option away.
It creates this perpetual market anxiety. You can't commit to a good enough choice because the algorithm is constantly whispering that a perfect choice is just around the corner.
That is the behavioral sink in the modern age, abundance leading to paralysis. And it forces this focus on superficiality, which directly contributes to the massive gender polarization we're seeing.
Right, because the algorithm isn't just a passive platform. It's an active participant. It's shaping our desires to keep us engaged. And in doing that, it's driving the sexes into completely different and often conflicting realities.
It creates this massive market distortion. On one side, you have what we're calling digital hypergamy for women, and on the other, you have digital invisibility for a huge number of men.
Let's unpack digital hypergamy first. Hypergamy itself, the idea of marrying up, is an old concept.
It's a very old, evolutionarily sound strategy, but what the apps have done is globalize the mating pool. So marrying up no longer means the most successful person in your town. It means the perceived global top 0.1%. And you have instant, algorithmically curated access to that illusion.
This reminds me of that story we have from the source material about Elena in Seoul. She's on a date with an architect, by any normal measure, a great partner.
A fantastic partner, but she's completely distracted because her phone is showing her these elite tier matches. The illusion is more powerful than the reality sitting right in front of her.
And her quote just sums up the whole dilemma. She says, "I feel like I'm standing in front of a buffet that never ends, but I'm starving because I'm too afraid to pick a plate and realize it's the only one I get."
It's the paralysis of abundance. The architect sitting across from her feels like a compromise, a final decision. Why would you make a final decision when the buffet is endless?
And the engine that keeps that buffet looking so appealing is the validation dopamine loop. The constant stream of likes, matches, DMs.
It's a neurochemical disruptor. And it's important to remember, dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the seeking chemical, the anticipation chemical. The apps provide this unpredictable, variable reinforcement that locks you into a cycle of constantly seeking more validation.
So your brain gets flooded with these artificial signals that you're incredibly desirable, which then inflates your own perceived mate value.
Systematically. It can lock women, especially who receive a disproportionate amount of this online attention, into this cycle where their expectations become completely detached from the offline, real-world market they actually live in.
That inflation leads to what you call the long-term relationship liquidity trap. That's an economic term.
Yeah.
How does it apply here?
Well, liquidity is how fast you can turn an asset into cash. In relationships, liquidity is how easily you can exit one partnership and find another. When a woman's perceived value is constantly being inflated by the algorithm, an offer of commitment from a man,
It's seen as a threat.
it can be. It's seen as a threat to her autonomy, to her optionality. Committing to one person means you're freezing your assets, you're losing that liquidity. Why settle for this stable, reliable stock when the next swipe could be a speculative crypto coin that goes to the moon?
So the very thing that builds a society-stable, committed partnership is reframed as a bad investment.
For some, yes. The pursuit of independence gets turbocharged by these aspirational narratives, and it can morph into a total paralysis of commitment.
Okay, now let's flip the coin. What's happening on the other side of this attention economy for the majority of men?
For men, the story is one of attention asymmetry. The data is pretty stark. The globalized digital market concentrates almost all of the female attention onto a tiny fraction of men.
What are the numbers, roughly?
Some studies suggest the top 10% of male profiles get something like 80% of the attention from women, which means the other 80 or 90% of men are rendered effectively digitally invisible.
Their asset stability, kindness, a good job are just frozen. They're not seen by the system's initial filters.
It's a profound sexual resource deflation for the majority. These are often the men society is built on, the engineers, the accountants, the quiet builders. But they don't have the hypervisual, high-performance profile that the algorithm rewards, so they are, for all intents and purposes, erased.
And this brings us to Marcus from the suburb in Ohio. He's the embodiment of this. He's adopted what's called the Great Disconnect. He's gone into a kind of high-tech monk mode.
He's the modern version of Calhoun's Beautiful Ones. He's given up. He works out in a VR gym. He avoids real-world interaction. He's retreated into a world without risk because the real world has taught him he's invisible.
And his quote is just, it's brutal. He says, "The algorithm taught me that I don't exist unless I'm a predator or a prince. Since I'm neither, I've chosen to be a ghost."
He has accepted his erasure. And for the men who don't choose to be ghosts, that feeling of invisibility triggers a huge compensatory mechanism.
You're talking about the whole industry of hypermasculine self-help, the alpha narrative.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry built on selling men a feeling of agency in a game that feels rigged. It tells them if they can just optimize their performance, if they can learn the right lines, wear the right suit, they can somehow beat the algorithm.
Which leads to this destructive split in the male response.
A total bifurcation. You either get complete withdrawal, the lying flat movement, men like Marcus who just stop trying, or you get the embrace of extreme acquisition strategies.
The ruthless pursuit of money, status, manipulation, whatever it takes to become visible.
Both are incredibly destructive responses to a fundamentally broken system.
And all of this is happening because the rules of the game are hidden. The algorithm is a black box. So users are forced to invent their own theories about how it works.
That's a huge part of the trust bankruptcy. You don't know why you're being shown certain profiles or why you're not getting matches, so you create what researchers call folk theories.
Like the idea of a hidden attractiveness score, an ELO score, or that new profiles get a temporary boost.
Exactly. Or that your swipe ratio matters. Users get anxious that if they're too picky and swipe left too often, the app will secretly punish them by hiding their profile.
So that fear drives them to do things that are counterproductive.
It drives them to play the numbers game. They'll expand their search filters way beyond what they're actually interested in geographically, age-wise, just to seem more active to the system.
So you might set your radius to 1,000 miles, even though you have no intention of dating someone that far away.
Right.
Just in the hopes that the algorithm will see your high activity level and then show you to more desirable people who are actually nearby.
It's a totally self-sabotaging loop. You're performing for the algorithm, not for yourself. Sure. You're diluting your own match pool and engaging in unsatisfying behavior just to stay visible. The entire system is built for engagement, not connection.
So when you put it all together, digital hypergamy on one side, digital invisibility on the other, the result is this profound social atomization. Everyone retreats into their own algorithmically curated bubble.
And we see a rejection of the very things that used to hold society together, the necessary friction, the interdependence, the shared roles.
This brings us to that thought experiment from our sources. Sarah and June living in the same hyper-digital city.
Right. Sarah's in apartment 4B, June's in 4C. They are separated by a few inches of drywall, but also by this massive digital chasm. On paper, they could be the solution to each other's loneliness.
But the algorithm won't let them meet.
The algorithm is actively keeping them apart. It's feeding Sarah content that tells her June, the quiet, stable engineer, isn't leveled up enough for her. It's reinforcing her cognitive illusion of high status.
And at the same time, it's feeding June content that tells him a woman like Sarah is just a distraction from his real purpose, which is self-optimization and building his value.
They are physically closer than humans have ever been, but they are psychologically isolated by these personalized, polarizing narratives. The social fabric just shreds because we're losing the necessity of struggle and cooperation that forges bonds.
Our mating mechanisms evolved to assess people in the real world with all the complex cues that it involves. The online world is just too thin, too curated, too deceptive.
And when both sides are focused purely on performance, her performing her high status and optionality, him performing his ruthless acquisition or his total withdrawal, there's no room left for cooperation. There's no interdependence.
So I want to talk about a specific group of men here. The ones who aren't invisible because they're low value, but because their value isn't flashy. The stable, successful, loyal men. The builders. What's their response to being erased by this market?
We're seeing something that can only be described as an exodus. It's a quiet but significant movement. These men, the reliable, often introverted builders of companies, systems, and wealth, are finding that the virtues they offer are completely devalued in modern Western dating markets.
The algorithm doesn't have a metric for loyalty or emotional stability.
Exactly. The system has created what's called a Fisherian runaway effect.
Explain that.
In biology, it's where a trait, like a peacock's long tail, becomes exaggerated over generations because females develop a preference for it, and that preference gets genetically linked to the trait itself. In the digital market, the long tail is superficial markers, hypervisual aesthetics, aggressive performance. The algorithm amplifies those, so user preferences become exaggerated and self-reinforcing, and the deep, substantive qualities get ignored.
So the system mocks their virtues. It treats stability as boring and loyalty as a liability. The source material doesn't frame these men as predators looking for an easier market. It frames them as refugees.
And that's the key psychological insight. They aren't fleeing from commitment. They are fleeing from a system that punishes their character. So they go elsewhere. They find partners in cultures, whether it's geographically or it's philosophically, that still see strength, loyalty, and stability as foundational gifts for a partnership.
It's a search for a place where their contributions are actually seen.
Seen and valued instead of being mocked by a culture that only rewards the loudest performance.
And this erosion, this loss of friction and outsourcing of human skills, it doesn't just stop at mating, does it? It's affecting our very ability to think.
Oh, absolutely. AI in particular is accelerating the atrophy of conceptual space.
What do you mean by conceptual space?
It's that difficult internal mental workshop where you forge new ideas, where moral imagination happens, where you solve complex problems. It's effortful. In Universe 25, the mice stopped building creative nests. They lost those skills. They just fell into a sterile routine.
And we're doing the same thing. We're outsourcing the cognitive struggle, the very friction that creates insight, to things like large language models.
It's the perfect parallel. Why struggle to write a complex argument or have a difficult debate or even just remember facts when an AI can do it for you instantly? That dependence breaks the feedback loop between effort and understanding. It leads to minimal engagement and maximal passivity. It's cognitive stagnation.
It creates an illusion of competence. You feel smart because you can access information so quickly, but you haven't actually built the mental structures to understand it deeply.
Right. You mistake fluency for understanding. And if we're not careful, we'll find that we've preserved efficiency, but completely extinguished our own agency and our own intellectual vitality.
So there's one last layer to this algorithmic execution I want to cover. We've talked about the behavior, the psychology, but what about the biology? What is this constant digital immersion, this dopamine cycle, actually doing to our brains on a structural level?
The evidence is, well, it's deeply concerning, especially for younger brains, but it really applies to any heavy user. The constant variable reinforcement from social media hijacks and alters our dopamine pathways in a way that is very similar to substance addiction.
And this isn't just a chemical change. We're seeing actual structural changes in the brain.
Yes. We see dysregulation in 3 key areas: the basal ganglia, the amygdala, and most critically, the prefrontal cortex, or PFC.
Okay, break those down. What do they do?
The basal ganglia is all about habit formation. When that's dysregulated, you get the compulsive, mechanical, endless scrolling, even when it's not giving you any pleasure. It's just a habit you can't break.
The mindless checking.
Exactly. The amygdala is the brain's emotional center. It processes fear and stress. Alterations there are linked to the increased anxiety and emotional dysregulation we see so much of. But the prefrontal cortex is the big one.
That's the CEO of the brain, right? The part responsible for higher order thinking.
It's your executive function. Long-term planning, impulse control, weighing future consequences. Research on internet addiction shows decreased gray matter volume in parts of the PFC.
So the very system that demands instant gratification is physically weakening the part of our brain that's responsible for delaying gratification.
It's a perfect vicious cycle. It structurally compromises your ability to make good long-term decisions, like investing in a difficult but rewarding relationship. The environment is literally changing our brains to make us better, more compliant consumers of the platform.
It's the ultimate execution. The technology isn't just changing our culture, it's changing our neurology to lock us into a state of cognitive isolation.
The atrophy becomes total. We're not just behaving like the mice in the sink. Our brains are being rewired to make that behavior the default. It's not a character flaw. It's an environmental outcome.
At the end of the day, the algorithm couldn't care less about the survival of human civilization.
It's completely indifferent. Its only goal is to harvest your dopamine and your attention for profit.
And when you look at it that way, What we're living through starts to look like a kind of soft depopulation event. It's not a war or a famine, it's a behavioral execution. The very structures that create and sustain life are being eroded by apathy, by confusion, and by this algorithmic abstraction of human beings.
The great irony is that this collapse comes from success. We built a world of such abundance that we eliminated the necessity for struggle, and now we're sinking into the paralysis that follows.
So what's the way out, if there is one?
It has to start with reclaiming psychological sovereignty. It means consciously recognizing that the digital signals, the likes, the matches, are artificial metrics. They are junk food for your soul, designed specifically to hijack your evolutionary wiring.
So it requires a kind of radical algorithmic hygiene, a strategic disengagement from that validation loop.
You have to shift your locus of control. Move it away from this chaotic, distorted external world of the algorithm and back to a disciplined internal world that you control. That means focusing on real-world generative investment, building things, cooperating with people in person.
Rather than just performing for a digital audience.
We have to restore behavioral vitality. That means consciously and culturally revaluing the difficult generative roles, being a parent, a mentor, building a community. And it means protecting that conceptual space in our own minds, shielding ourselves from the easy answers of AI so we can do the hard work of thinking for ourselves.
The ultimate insight here, from Calhoun's mice all the way to that couple in the coffee shop, seems to be that real human connection is forged in necessity. It's sustained by friction. Our task, then, is to rediscover that necessary difficulty, that shared purpose that allows us to build something meaningful together across generations.